driver has to take 10 consecutive hours off duty in order for it to be valid. And that basically, if you think about the 10-hour off-duty period, resets their day. The 60 or 70-hour rule resets their week. If you think about it that way, not necessarily that it's a week or a real day, but if you think about the 10-hour off-duty consecutive period resets their day or shift, and the 60 or 70-hour rule resets their week. Okay, you can call it a pay period, you can call it a week, even if it doesn't matter if it's Monday through Friday, Sunday through, it doesn't matter. It's just still that resets their week. So they can drive no more than 11 hours. Doesn't matter. Basically, if they're sitting behind the steering wheel, they're driving. So they can't drive more than 11 hours. They can't drive after having been on duty for the 14th, once the 14th hour is met. So once they've been on duty for 14 hours, they can't drive anymore. They can drive a non-commercial motor vehicle, but they cannot drive a commercial motor vehicle once they've hit 14 hours of being on duty, whether they're on duty not driving, until they have that 10 hours off duty. That's what separates the each 14-hour period. And then the 30-minute break. Don't forget they have to take the 30-minute break, at least for now. The 60/70-hour rule is under 395.3. No motor carrier shall require or permit a driver proper to carry a commercial motor vehicle, nor shall any driver drive a proper to carry a commercial motor vehicle, regardless of the number of motor carriers used by the driver services. This is where, if you watch the driver qualification file session, this is where this comes in. This is where it says, and this is why I specifically have a form in there for other compensated work, because it says right in these regulations, regardless of the number of motor carriers using the driver's services. Other companies, it doesn't matter, anything that if you're employed by 2 different motor carriers, it doesn't matter, you have to add all of those other compensated works in with your system. Yeah, you would be logging it as on duty, not driving for non-commercial motor vehicle purposes. So if you work at Burger King, you're going to just put Burger King work, on duty, not driving. But for other motor carriers, you're still going to put driving because you were driving for them. So people confuse this. Here's my quick answer, my easy answer to this. If you operate 5 days a week, you're on a 60-hour rule. If your company as a whole, not the driver individually, but if your company is doing operations 5 days a week, and only 5 days a week, not 7 days a week, but 5 days a week, and then you shut your doors and there's no dispatching, no operations, trucks are not moving on Saturday or Sunday or the other 2 days a week, you're on a 60-hour rule. If you operate 7 days a week, if your trucks are always rolling, then you're on a 70-hour rule. You cannot use the 70-hour rule if you're only open 5 days a week. I mean, if you're only operating 5 days a week, you can't use the 70-hour rule. Could somebody that's qualifies for the 70-hour rule qualify for 60? Yeah, it doesn't help you, but you could if you wanted to. But somebody that's not operating a full 7 days a week cannot, or for 8 days a week, basically 7 days a week, cannot use a 70-hour rule. So if you're operating, now some of you might say, well, what if I operate 6 days a week? You're on the 60-hour rule. Can't operate 7, because the 70-hour rules in any period of 8 consecutive days. So they're actually saying 7 days a week you're operating. It's never stopping. You're always operating 7 days a week. Otherwise, they would use 60 hours in any 7 period. And therefore, basically, if you're not operating 7 days a week, you're on a 60-hour rule. So easy way to say it, probably. So let's go over the 60 and 70-hour rules. So I used to teach this, and I got in an argument with an officer one time, and technically he was right. He was right about it, but I've seen auditors go both ways. So I'm going to kind of tell you the little story, and then we're going to go over each one of these. Auditors, I've seen them line the logbooks up, and they did not take into account this 7 or 8 day period, the rolling, it rolls off, because during audit, they just line up the logbooks, and they just keep adding it and adding it and adding it until they see that 34-hour restart. So I was trying to explain that, and I probably wasn't explaining it very well to him, but he was like, no, there is a roll-off. And anyway, so I'm going to do it that way because, yes, he was correct. But The 60/70 hour rule, we're going to do this as a 70-hour example. It's exactly the same if you're on a 60, but it's 60 in 7 days, but we're going to do it on a 70 and 8-day rule because the majority is what I find is the 70-hour rule. And this is based on a floating or rolling 7 or 8 day period. So this example shows 70/8-day schedule. The hours from 9 days ago have dropped off the calculation. So if we look at it, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, this one has dropped off. It stops and then you move over. So let's just go right to it, okay? This is always moving and you'll understand how I'm kind of doing this. So if we're looking at this, on duty, not driving, on duty, or on duty driving, on duty, not driving, total hours on duty. People worry about the off duty and the sleeper berth time. It doesn't matter. For this particular rule, who cares about any of that drama going on? What you care about is only adding on duty, not driving, and driving together. That's it. The other stuff, nobody cares about, at least not for this purpose. Total hours on duty, whether you were driving or you're just on duty, is 9 hours on Sunday. It's 9 hours on Monday. Tuesday, it's 7.5. Then it's 10, 8.5. They're only looking at these days right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. If all of this right here, they're looking at this right here. So 9, 9, 7.5, 10. If this is under 70, which here's the total. So if you add all this up, it totals 70. And now on Monday, it's only 65.5. Well, yesterday it was 70. How'd it turn into 65.5? Because this first day dropped off. Sunday here it dropped off, and now it added this 4.5. So this one drops off, this one comes on. And if you do it again, you're just taking that square and you're moving it, and it's only calculating the 8 days. Everything before goes away, the newest one comes on. So the 8 days is the current day. Today. That's what they're doing today. So if they stop a driver and he's partway through his day, he's not finished driving, but he's only been driving 10 hours, he's not in violation because he's only 66.5 hours. The officer's probably going to say, hey, you know you only have 3.5 hours on your 70-hour rule left, so are you going to get to your destination in time? And the driver might say, yeah, I only have an hour left and then I'm off duty for the rest of the time. And the officer will say, fine and dandy. Even if he says, I don't think I'm going to make it, the officer will then say, you only got 3.5 hours left, make sure you stop if you're not going to get to your destination. And drivers know that. The cool thing about the ELD system is that the ELD actually does this for you. It does all this calculating and countdown. So the driver actually sees the countdown clock, and it sees the countdown clock for the 10 hours. It sees it for the 30-minute break. It sees it for the driver sees all this on the ELD system. So they can't say, well, I didn't know. Yes, they do know. And you know, because you can see it on the back office side on the ELD systems. You can see it. So now the driver's at 66.5 hours. And on Tuesday, say he only works 3.5 hours, then he's going to be at 70 hours. And say at that point, now the 70 hours has been met, now he has to take 34 hours off. So once they've hit either that 60 or 70-hour rule, they have to take 34 consecutive hours off. That's a full day and a half. That's one full day plus another half day. They have to take that off-duty period off completely. If somebody only worked 10 hours, 7 days a week, they would never be in violation. So technically, if you only operate 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, you'll never reach that 70-hour, or say one of the days you're you're off duty for 30 minutes every day. So technically you're not. So say you operate 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, technically you never have to take a day off. Does that seem weird? It kind of does seem weird. So if you limit 10 hours a day for every single driver, they can operate it by 7 days a week. Never have to take a day off as long as they're operating 7 days a week. 395.2, definitions of on-duty time. So all time waiting to be dispatched, all time inspecting, servicing, condition, a C&B, fueling, maintenance, stuff like that. Anytime driving is on duty. You're driving and you're on duty. All time spent aboard a vehicle not in a sleeper berth or driving. So if you're the passenger of a vehicle, you're on duty, not driving. So say you have a pickup truck. It's over 10,000 pounds, so you have to be doing hours of service tracking. The driver has to be logging or have the ELD system. All the passengers of that big truck are on duty, not driving. They just are. Unless they're using it for personal conveyance, then they're on duty, not driving. So hotshots used to have this problem because they would have a co-driver in a hotshot vehicle, but because the pickup truck itself did not have a sleeper berth, the hotshot, they're all on duty the whole time. So it didn't make any sense, and people were getting in trouble for that. So for your responsibilities as carrier, you're responsible to comply with the rules. The compliance for the rules by your drivers is your responsibility, and that's what the DOT says. It goes back to that whole safety measurement cycle, and to have rules and responsibilities, that's you. And then, you know, proper training, monitoring, and tracking. That's the ELD systems, that's training, that's reprimanding, things like that. It's your responsibility to hold your drivers accountable. So when they violate hours of service rules, it's your responsibility to make those corrective actions. Accuracy of data, of the data, it is your responsibility to validate and make sure that the driver's not falsifying their logs. So you're supposed to check their logbooks or ELD systems or timesheets, whatever it may be, against what actually occurred. So if you're paying them, say they get paid per diems, pay does not have anything to do with hours of service, by the way. I just want to make that perfectly clear, and a lot of people get this and they think, well, I'm paying them, so they must be on duty, not driving. That's not true. You can pay, the DOT has no opinion on pay whatsoever. They have no opinion on how much you pay the driver, or if you pay them to sit at a hotel and watch TV all day. That's not what this is. What this is they're telling you when they're on duty. When you're telling them as an employer they have to do something, that's when you put them on duty. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but it's your responsibility to check the accuracy of that. So if they're falsifying the logs, the DOT says it's your responsibility to validate that they're not doing that. Basically, here's the point of this. If a driver turns in logbooks and he says, I was off duty for the last 2 weeks, and you saw him in the shop like every single day for the last 2 weeks working, you know he's lying. You know he's falsifying his logs. So it's your responsibility to bring that driver in and say, absolutely not. You were working. I know you were working. The timesheets show you were working. No. Fix your logbooks. You're not going to be falsifying logs. It's your responsibility to hold them accountable that way. It's also your responsibility to check the data against other records. So payroll records, fuel receipts, GPS records. If your GPS records do not match what the logbook says, because sometimes they are different, and back, you know, before the ELD systems and still some carriers, they have their GPS records in the truck, but they're saying, well, I qualify for short haul, so I'm going to have them do timesheets. We're not going to do ELDs or paper logs. Well, if the GPS records don't match what the timesheet says, they're falsifying. If the GPS records don't match what the logbooks say, they're falsifying, which is your responsibility as well as the driver's. So what kind of records do they actually check against? They check against bill of ladings, delivery receipts, fuel receipts, leased operators, ports of entries, lease agreements, timed work reports, like I said, payroll records, GPS records, anything with a date and timestamp on it. They can even request toll records. So they can get video because they are a government agency, so they can contact the toll booth company and say, or sometimes it's operated by a state, sometimes it's not, but so they can contact them and say, hey, I want a picture of the driver who said he was going through this toll booth at this time. Send me a picture. They will do that if they really, really think that you're hiding something. So they can do this. Now, I got into a little tiff with somebody one time because they said that they can ask for as many documents as they want, unlimited, until, you know, their heart's content. So technically, could they? I suppose technically they could, but their own user manual, so it's called the EFOTM, I think. It's their user manual. So that regulation actually says that they can only request up to 8 supporting documents. Most of the time what you'll find is they check 2 or 3. They check 2 or 3 different documents. Could they ask for up to 8? Yes, they could. Could they ask for 30 different documents? they can ask. And could they say you didn't want to give them to me? They probably could. And I don't see the point in doing that. I have had a couple clients who are like, no, I don't want to give it to them. And then I had to, then I was the bad guy, but it is what it is. My point here is they're going to ask for more supporting documents when they don't believe you. If everything looks right, and they're most of the time going to ask for the supporting documents that matter the most. Payroll records, GPS records, and, timesheets. That's what matters the most. That's what can prove something more than anything else, is those things, especially if they have to clock in and clock out. It shows a timestamp right there. Bill of lading receipts, if the shipper is actually timestamping those bill of ladings, those have timestamps on them. They know where they were. Okay, so the thing that they look at the very most is they look at this. They look at your SMS report. They already know where you were, how long you were there, who you were with, what you were doing, and what kind of violations you got. Now, I just randomly picked a company, so these aren't my clients. But they know that on May 28th, 2019, this driver was in Oklahoma getting stopped with a level 3 inspection, roadside, and the driver got a speeding ticket. They know what time it was. It was right here, 1:17 p.m. to 1:42 p.m. He was in Oklahoma. They could get this information and find out exactly. They could get a copy of the report, or they can just ask you for it because you're required to keep it for 12 months. They could look to see what time you were there, exactly where you were. And then by looking at the logbooks, figure out, for one, if you were speeding, how you made it from Oklahoma all the way to Dallas, Texas in 2 hours. They're going to know you're falsifying. Don't assume that your driver is really, really good at falsifying and he's going to be able to cheat, because if a driver was stopped, this is their baseline for everything. Everything they do during an audit, this is their baseline. They look at this. You can guarantee, and I don't want to guarantee 100%, but I'm going to say with 99% accuracy, an investigator will pull these drivers for the last 6 months. That's who they're going to pull. They're going to pull from these drivers for the hours of service purposes. They're going to say, let me see the logbooks for May of 2019 for this driver. Guarantee it to 99% accuracy, because there's always that 1%. Or they're going to say, I want to see the logbooks for, now assuming that this was within a 6-month period, but if it's within the 6 month, they're going to say, I want to see the log pages for this particular driver for the whole month of April in 2019. And they're going to pick these. Not to mention, they're probably going to pick this vehicle to inspect, and they're also going to pick this driver. If the driver was recently hired, they're probably going to pick this driver too. So just FYI, this is their baseline for everything whenever they audit or investigate. Now they know they can prove the driver was there, what time they were there, who they were with, what was happening. So whenever the logbook says something different, they're going to nail you. It's automatic falsification of log. So trucking operations and sleep. So hours of service regulations don't prohibit long duty periods or, having weird shift hours. They don't prohibit that. So it still results in driver fatigue. So restricted time for sleep, accumulations of sleep debt, fatigue from continuous operations, conflict between schedules and a person's natural body of when they feel like it's time to go sleep. So your driver may feel sleepy even whenever they're totally in compliance with the regulations. They might have plenty of hours left on their logbook or on their ELD system or on their timesheet, but that doesn't mean they necessarily should be driving. A driver who is tired is tired. Let them go to sleep. So let's talk about ELDs for a minute. So if you're on logbooks now, you have to have ELDs instead, with a few exceptions. If your vehicle's older than 1999, you can still be using logbooks, which is why I feel like it's important to still continue to put hours of service training out there, because not everybody's on ELDs, which might be you. If your vehicle is 1999 and older, an ELD may not be required. There are some criteria to that, so make sure that you're properly looking at that. If you qualify for timesheets, if you're short haul exemption, you don't have to have ELDs. But if you more than 8 times in a 30-day period have to revert, if you don't qualify for that short haul exemption, you have to have paper logs for those days where you don't qualify for the short haul part. So in that case, you don't have ELDs, you have paper logs that you're still doing. If you're required to maintain logs more than 8 times in a 30-day period, an ELD will be required. And it's not for the driver, which is interesting because if you think about it, logbooks are attached to a driver, ELDs are attached to a vehicle. So the way, and it was not a really good concept in their mind, they should have attached the ELD to a driver, but I understand why they didn't. I understand why they did it that way. So what they decided was that if that vehicle requires an ELD or a paper log more than 8 times in a 30-day rolling period, so it's always rolling, it's just 8 times in a 30-day cycle, it doesn't matter what month it was, more than 8 times during that period, it doesn't matter who was the driver, then now that vehicle and the driver driving that vehicle has to be on ELD systems. So if you're a company that goes back and forth a lot and you're sometimes in that 8-day period and sometimes you're not and all that stuff, you're just better off to get ELDs, because even if you're on short haul, a lot of those ELD systems have short haul provisions in there and it's still tracking it. So yes, you're using the short haul provision, which allows different things for different people. Sometimes it's not as beneficial, but then your drivers who are getting in there later are still on their ELD systems. So with that being said, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know you're crazy busy. So I know with hours of service, there's always going to be a lot more questions. So this was just a really brief overview of hours of service and kind of how it works. Hours of service takes a while to learn and figure out and understand, because there's always the variables. Well, what if this happens? What if this happens? There's this exception, there's that exception. Then contact me and I will kind of walk you through the situation. Am I going to sit on the phone with you or come to your office and do an hour training? No, I'm going to charge for that. But if you email me and you ask me a very specific question and say, hey, here's my question. If I feel like I need to actually have a phone call with you, then I'll just call you. Otherwise, just email me, reach out, ask the questions you need to ask, and I'm happy to answer them. If you're interested in taking everything digital, and I'm not talking about ELDs, we are not an ELD company. I don't want to be an ELD company. But if you're interested in taking all of your stuff digital, then go to dot-ready.com. Check that out. It's a platform that we actually designed to be totally 100% compliant with DOT regulation for the areas that the platform covers. So check that out. You can schedule a demo, all that stuff right there. So anyway, have a great day. Thanks.